Hey everyone, Road Breach here, and today we're taking a look at Ben 10 Protector of Earth. Ben 10 Protector of Earth is a beat-em-up developed by High Voltage Software and published by D3 Publisher for PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable, Nintendo DS, and Wii on October 30th, 2007, and Ben 10 was a show that premiered on December 27th, 2005. It followed Benjamin Tennyson, who goes on a summer vacation with his grandpa and cousin, where he ends up finding an alien device called the Omnitrix, which allows him to transform into different aliens to fight the forces of a warlord named Vilgax. I recently finished watching this show the game is based on, and I had a lot of fun rewatching it for this video. The show is well written, funny, and the theme song is awesome.
It started when an alien device did what it did, and stuck itself upon his wrist with secrets that it hid. Now he's got superpowers, he's no ordinary kid, he's Ben 10.
I remember seeing an announcement that the show was getting a more mature reboot, and that had me realize I never played any of Ben 10 video games. Neither have I seen anybody talk about them, with the exception of the game for the Hyperscan, which I will not be covering in this video, because I'm not going to dump a bunch of money on cards for a bad game for a terrible console that was discontinued in less than a year. So we'll focus on games that came out for consoles that were on shelves for a good while, starting here. So let's take a trip in the Rust Bucket and see what this game has to offer. Looking at the case, we can see Ben turning into Heat Blast. At the very bottom, we can see the Rust Bucket driving over a bridge that's partially destroyed by a giant robot. In the background, we can see Earth with Vilgax looming over it. The title does stand out very well from the background, but I do feel it could have been a little bigger. The back tells you about the over 80 unlockable combos, multiplayer battle mode, and co-op, and different settings for the Wiimote. And now, onto the game. The game tries its best to replicate the style of the show, and I feel that it hasn't aged particularly well. I don't think it's impossible to make the art style of Ben 10 work in 3D. Developers are able to make really good looking 3D games that look 2D nowadays, and games like Jet Set Radio and Okami came out before that, so it's most likely a time and budget thing here. One thing that's kinda strange is the lip syncing. Ben, Gwen, and Max look like stop-motion characters with sticker mouths when they talk, which I kinda like. But some characters have 3D mouths for some reason that aren't animated particularly well. And one thing that is very obvious is how they tried to give the illusion of depth with the background, but it ends up looking like a soundstage with a backdrop that's only a few feet away. Though to be fair, I can tell who I'm looking at because even though they aren't exact, the character models are reasonably accurate to their show counterparts. And the levels do look like something you'd see in the show. Another thing that helps the game resemble the show is the fact that everyone reprised their respective role for the game. And now we get to talk about the music, which I am not a big fan of. It doesn't help that the previous game I covered had an excellent soundtrack, because the music here is the embodiment of mid. But there was one track that was played in the final phase of Dr. Animo's boss fight that I liked. So the presentation here leaves something to be desired, but how's the actual gameplay? Protector of Earth is a beat-em-up with puzzle solving and platforming. You run into a linear level, enemies spawn, you beat them up, and you move on. Despite the game being called Ben 10, you only get access to Forearms, Heat Blast, Accelerate, Cannon Bolt, and Wildvine. Each alien has a light and heavy attack, several combos that are situational, and a block that'll keep you safe from most attacks regardless of which direction you're facing. There are some differences with each alien's moveset. Forearms hits like a truck, Accelerate is fast but does chip damage, and Wildvine can extend with more range to his melee attacks, but they all feel kinda homogeneous, with some attacks doing the same thing just with a different alien, and the normal combos not feeling any different from one another. Some aliens have area effect attacks and ranged attacks to thin out groups or pick off enemies from a distance, but the ranged attacks are difficult to aim because of the fixed camera. But even though some aliens feel very similar to each other, I still wanted to play as all of them. Some standout attacks I liked were Forearm's Tornado Hook, Heat Blast's Fireball Flurry, Wildvine's Grenades, and Cannon Bolt's Suction Blast that I don't remember from the show. You can smash things in the level, which will give you health and power for the Omnitrix. Speaking of which, much like the show, your alien forms are temporary, but you can keep the transformation active with the aforementioned Omnitrix power. If you take too much damage while you're transformed, you transform back into Ben, but you can still do damage and block. But Ben's damage output is pretty low, but he does have a dodge roll, so you can get yourself out of a bad situation if you turn back into Ben. But you can find chrono crystals that make the Omnitrix recharge faster, and DNA'd that increases your maximum health. The enemies start off being pretty easy to take down, but as you progress, you run into enemies that can take more abuse. But combat is not all of the gameplay, because the game also has platforming and puzzles. Platforming shows up in most of the levels, and I usually switch to Heat Blast when platforming because double jumping with Heat Blast allows you to glide and make jumps easier. But you don't have to use Heat Blast for the platforming because the movement controls are great and you can steer your jumps in midair like Mario. One alien that I do not recommend changing into for platforming is Cannonbolt, because he curls up into a ball whenever you move, which is very unruly for a mechanic that requires precision. However, one big problem that crops up all the time in this game is that some platforms are not affected by your shadow, and considering that this game has a fixed camera, it's nigh detrimental to this mechanic. But there are some ramps that require Cannonbolt's ball mode to use, and swing points that require Wildvine.
Needless to say, I keep a check. She was a bad bird, nevertheless.
Swinging from these swing points is honestly incredibly nerve-wracking because the second you jump to one of them, Wildvine doesn't immediately attach to one of them, so I feel like I'm going to fall. I don't end up falling, but it feels like I am whenever I do it. And there are easy puzzles that would be good if Grandpa Max and Gwen didn't chime in telling you what to do.
Put that fire out before the whole place explodes.
These security protocols need everything done at once. I wonder if you can use Accelerate to cool the system.
If you charge up, you should be able to burst up that wall.
Are you too slow to figure out you need speed here?
Get moving, Ben. Accelerate will help pick up the pace.
As much as I hate to say it, maybe the weeb self is the best form to use here.
Might be time to get some help from the big red guy.
If you're only going to think with your muscles, you should at least use a form that has them.
Gwen, Max, I can figure this out on my own. You do not need to chime in. As for the puzzles themselves, they aren't Portal levels of complex, but they do require enough brain power that you can't just brute force your way through it. And I do think they're a nice reprieve from the combat. The most complex they get is figuring out where to move these mirrors to get the light to shine on Ghost Freak. The enemies are pretty basic. There are some that shoot, some that can teleport, some that can block, and plenty that use melee attacks. Though I do have to say that plenty of the enemies just feel like reskins of something I already fought, like the drones, the Forever Knights, and the Thornhounds. But there are enemies that feel different from enemies you've already fought, like the Vilgax mercenaries that can hover above the battlefield. They start off being pretty easy to put down, but later on, enemies get bigger health pools and spawn in bigger numbers. And these bears? Damn, I might as well be fighting several Tog 2s with an M249. The story feels very generic. Ben gets his Omnitrix crystal stolen, and now he's only able to turn into Heat Blast and Forearms, and Vilgax gives Ben's Rogues Gallery power boosts to cause chaos around the country. I find the trope of American media about alien invasions taking place in America where the heroes are pretty funny. Out of the two largest landmasses on the planet, you pick the one where there's a formidable counter threat that's capable of stopping you. Anyway, I guess we can talk bosses now. Level 1's boss is a giant robot that'll slam its fists into the platform you're standing on, which gives you the opportunity to get some hits in. But you can also hit the robot's chest with ranged attacks. And much like Resident Evil Village, I find it humorous that you can block an attack this big. Once you get the robot's health down to 83%, you're prompted to do a QuickTime event by dragging the cursor to the spot it tells you to. The robot now moves a little faster and attacks more aggressively. Drain its health to 49% and the same thing will happen, and go a little further to take the thing down and shake the controllers to rip its core out. Next up is Enoch, the leader of the Forever Knights, who you fight at the end of level 3. Enoch will swing his sword at you when you're up close and charge at you when you're moderately far from him, and his sword can launch projectiles. He's got two different area effect attacks, one you need to run away from, and the other that you need to jump over. Level 4 has a rematch with Enoch in his mech suit. Enoch will slam his fists into the bridge to squash you, and after you get his health down to 83%, you need to go over to one of the pressure plates and zap Enoch. He'll then get more aggressive and use a shoulder check attack that you need to jump to not get affected by, and a chest beam that you need to run away from. The second phase also has him letting out health and Omnitrix power that you mostly can't get. Get Enoch's health down to 47% and you can zap him again. And now Enoch has a shockwave punch and a very short window to deal damage. And once you get his health down to 17%, that's when you can do the QuickTime event. Next boss is Kevin, who you fight at the end of level 6. Kevin will throw punches and create fire if you're up close. He'll throw an uppercut if you're a moderate distance away, and he'll erect a crystal spike, which can vary in size to hit you from up close or far away. Kevin can also fly, and when he does, he'll launch projectiles at you. On to level 8 that has you fighting a giant plant monster. The monster will slam its head into the ground and do a sweep attack. You need to bust the plant's balls to damage it, then use one of the Ramps' cannon bolt to whittle down its health even more. The plant will also use a flame breath attack, which ends up making the game chug.
How dare you! You think you can just take away my frames and think I won't notice? That's it, plant. More ball busting for you!
And rightly so, because Phase 3 is straight up obnoxious with how fast this plant moves. I'm honestly surprised I was able to kill this thing. Now on to level 11 that has a fight with Hex. Hex's staff can fire a beam attack from across the room and shotgun you with projectiles. He can also teleport, punch you, and make the fireplace blast you with fire that not even Heat Blast can handle, despite the fact that Pyronites, the species that Heat Blast is, literally live on a star. Level 15 has you fighting Ghost Freak. Ghost Freak will possess an enemy which you need to take down, then open the curtain to drain his health.
Ah, damn, that's bright!
As this goes on, enemies will increase to make the fight more chaotic, and you need to defeat them one by one until Ghost Freak has no more enemies left to possess. Once you get his health down to 70%, you go on to Stage 2, where you need to reflect the light at Ghost Freak by moving these statues. Stage 3 has Ghost Freak phasing in and out of tangibility, and he'll intermittently swipe at you and create fakes that have you needing to find the real one. And he'll turn into a shadow on the floor that you need to run away from, and spring up to attack you with tentacles that remind me of the Nightmare Puppet from Help Wanted. Then hit him with a QuickTime event and get him back into the Null Void. Next up is the bug guy Clancy. Clancy will start the fight by making a bug suit. He'll launch helical projectiles at you, and a bug wave that will turn into a bear trap, which you can jump over. He also has this crap version of Guile's Sonic Boom and Bug Fists. He also sees fit to turning into his friend's enemies by hopping around the arena like a frog. Next is Dr. Animo. Animo will punch you up close, and he'll do the thing that Earthbenders do in Avatar when you're far away, which doesn't really make sense considering we're on an oil rig that's made out of metal, but whatever. Once you get his health down by 80%, Animo will climb one of the towers and hop between them, which is when you need to stand on the pressure plate to knock him off and do a QuickTime event. He'll be more aggressive and be able to charge you after that. Get his health down to 40% and he'll climb the tower again for you to knock him down and do the QuickTime event. The last phase is where Animo is most aggressive, so you better remember to block and dodge. Next up is the Bounty Hunter 6-6. 6-6 has a blade that he'll try to hit you with up close, a grenade that takes a few seconds to detonate, a shockwave that you need to jump over, and several ranged weapons that do varying amounts of damage, with his missiles being the most deadly. He's pretty aggressive, so you better pay attention. And finally, we arrive at Vilgax. Vilgax will slowly lumber towards you to create a shockwave to damage you, and he has a dash attack that you can block. I initially thought you needed to hit these buttons to damage him, but I found that you need to get his health down to 70%, then hit the buttons, and you can do a QuickTime event. Vilgax will then ascend and slam down to attack you, use the dash, and he has a whip now. You need to use Cannon Bolt to jump the ramps and hit Vilgax from above. Then do another QuickTime event. The last phase of this fight has Vilgax electrifying the floor and throwing grenades. You need to use Wildvine in order to avoid taking damage from the floor and swing to Vilgax so you can hit him. One last QuickTime event and Vilgax is defeated.
All right, kids. Looks like we're ready to finally get back to our vacation. Where'd you like to go next?
I don't know about you guys, but I'm starving. Grandpa, you think the rust bucket can fit through a drive-thru?
You know what, Ben? Celebratory Wendy's sounds great. I like your style. And after the credits, we see an injured Vilgax swearing revenge. There is one more endurance level in the Null Void, but the cutscene after leaves off on an unsatisfying ending. You can also find Sumo Slammer cards around the levels, and if you collect all of them per level, then you can unlock the cutscenes, which honestly kinda seems like a pretty lame reward for finding these. Overall, this game is pretty good. Ben 10 Protector of Earth is an enjoyable brawler with some decent mechanics and a good difficulty curve. And while the story isn't particularly interesting, I feel this is a good example of doing a licensed game right. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching and gotta zoom.